government fails, the world's off its rails, leaders are whacked, democracy is under attack. It's time to get smart, folks, time to get real. Let's cut through the crap, tell us how you feel. Let's cue the talent, let's meet the host. Podcast by George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome back into another podcast by George. We've got a returnee to the PBG, and I'm just delighted to have her back. It's Pramilla Malick. She's back in the house. And Pramilla Malick, for folks that haven't seen her on before, she's a climate activist. She's one of the nation's foremost authorities on harm to the environment coming from pipelines, which literally came to her front door when a fracking facility located within walking distance of her home just ruined her neighborhood. And she's become a nationally known activist. She's run for public office. And tip of the hockey helmet to Jimmy Dore, where I first saw Pramilla. And speaking of Jimmy Dore, I wanted to get this in here, and I'm sure Pramilla will go along with this. Maybe we can get her take. But I want folks to check out his show on YouTube. JimmyDoreComedy.com, I think, is his website. Jimmy Dore is invaluable as one of the true left commentators in America. I mean, I try, but I pale in comparison to this guy. Jimmy is pushing the Democratic Party from the left, which I believe is our only solution, folks. All the Democratic Party mainstream media talking heads on CNN and MSNBC combined are worthless for two major reasons. You aren't going to change the Republican Party or any of its policies by attacking Republicans ad nauseum on Democratic platforms with Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and people like that. And by doing so, it's even worse than that because you become complicit with the destruction of humankind by deadlocking on the climate. Now, fully 1/3 of the electorate refuses to participate in the pro wrestling show known as American politics and does not care about the nuances between the two major political parties. Find a way to force the Democratic Party to move to the left to serve a new left-wing party and politicians from that party, and we can save the world from climate destruction. Without that, we're going to get a rapid death from Trumpy gas burners if they get back in control, or a slower death from liberal Paris Climate Accord supporters. I mean, it's more dire than that. And that's what we're going to be talking about today on the Podcast by George live line with Pramilla Malick. Pramilla, welcome back to the PBG.
Thank you for having me, George. It's wonderful to speak with you as always. To dovetail off of the your introduction, the climate analogy to the dystopia that you described between Republicans and Democrats would be the difference between climate denialism, which is synonymous with Republicans, and climate deception, which is synonymous with Democrats, because we should not forget that it was during the Obama era, and honestly, he was shepherding this issue during probably the single most time period in human history to act on climate was during the Obama administration. And he invested full force into gas, fracking, methane, gas. We've had unprecedented increases in methane emissions during the Obama administration. So again, what I say is climate truth is the crack between denial and deception. And because politicians and parties and the establishment are not addressing the truth of people's reality, that's why people don't vote. And I honestly can't blame them.
You're exactly right, and I'm glad you brought up the situation with Obama because, as you well know, all too well, Biden, put fracking pipelines underneath the entire country. Then they opened up exporting of fracking gas, and the explosion literally was underway. And, of course, the most recent news with Biden, it's funny, but it really isn't. Everybody was elated because he prohibited some of the drilling in the Arctic, and I went around telling people, and they don't like to hear it. I said, my God, Obama, Biden, Clinton opened the Arctic up twice to drilling during that administration. But that's all for another podcast. I could talk about that all day, obviously. But what I wanted to get with you on today, because I thought about you immediately when I saw this news come out, and it's this leaked draft report from the United Nations. And it's painting a distressing picture of how climate change will fundamentally reshape life on Earth in the coming decades, even if humans can tame planet-warming greenhouse gas emissions. And it's intimating what I've been talking about all along and what Pramilla's been sharing with our folks on the podcast when I can get her on, which is we're going by these tipping points. I mean, it's bad. It's going to get worse. We need to take action, real big action, immediately. And it's being intimated in this UN report, which climate scientists will tell you. Dr. Gerald Schnur was on my PBG just recently, said this is the authoritative document. Now, this is a draft. It's just been leaked. It'll be revised and be published in its entirety conclusively in February. But, Pram, it ain't looking good.
It's not looking good at all. I mean, everyone knows about the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold that everyone talks about, the Paris Climate Accord. But according to this leaked UN report, we're on track to cross that threshold in 2026, 5 years from now. 5 years from now. And they say that the models really predict that we will reach 3 degrees Celsius and rise. Now, the Paris Climate Accord was like, all these countries agreed we won't let it get past 1.5. But at the maximum we're going to allow is 2. Well, this model says we're going to 3. And it's no surprise because of the policy decisions that you see in United States of America, again, under both Obama and Trump. And I'll remind me to talk about a recent Supreme Court decision, which really encapsulates again, the dystopia, the disconnect between the rhetoric and the reality. We're poised to cross 3 degrees Celsius. We have Germany, which has shut down most of their nuclear power plants, but that's all being replaced by, that has been replaced by new coal plants. So the rhetoric is renewables, wind, solar, but the reality is all fossil fuel based. It's mostly gas. It's mostly fracking, which is the single worst source of power for the planet. We've had over a decade. Like I started this in 2010. It's 2011 now. So 11 years. And since 2010, we've been screaming at the rooftops about how dangerous fracking and methane is. If anyone had listened to us at all 10 years ago, we would not be facing the kind of stark future that this IPCC, stark imminent reality that this new UN report describes. I mean, it describes species extinction, massive flooding, sea level rise, droughts, famines. It's happening. I mean, we just saw this in the Northwest, record-breaking temperatures throughout the Northwest, throughout Canada, California. California is facing now droughts. California also shut down their nuclear power plants. San Onofre is the one that was shut down most recently. And now they want to shut down Diablo Canyon. But that's, again, all being replaced by gas. There are limits to how much power renewables can provide, wind and solar. And that is, California is proof of that. And that's why California has had brownouts, even though it has a high amount of solar capacity. These are kind of the things I want to talk about. New York just shut down its nuclear power plant. New York City, which serves New York City. New York City is the second largest consumer of power in the entire world, second only to Tokyo. We have lost 80% of our carbon-free power. So these models that the IPCC is describing, it didn't just happen overnight. This is willful policy decisions by elected officials who serve fossil fuel interests entirely due to corruption. And, this draft report, I'm kind of glad it was leaked, but I really worry about fossil fuel interests now coming in and, changing some of the modeling and some of the recommendations, because this UN report does recommend a substantial increase in nuclear power, over 50% increase in nuclear power. Mm-hmm. So in the United States, we're shutting nuclear power down. But if we have any hope whatsoever of addressing this climate crisis, or at least averting absolute annihilation, and I don't use these words hyperbolically, I mean, this is the reality we're facing, then we have no choice. We have to first stop shutting down nuclear power, but we actually need to expand nuclear power in the United States, in Europe. China is also doing that. China is expanding nuclear power, but they're also investing heavily in renewables. So it has to be a combination of all carbon-free sources of power. Carbon-free is the operative word. That is the only type of power that we should be developing going forward. And we're just not doing it on the magnitude and scale that we need to. That's the reality. And just the other day, just last week, the Supreme Court, and this is again a reflection of bipartisan corruption and bipartisan failure. Again, why so many people have just tuned out. The Supreme Court just ruled in favor of a pipeline company, the Penn East Pipeline. It's slated to go through New Jersey. And the state of New Jersey had fought that pipeline and had not given it access to state lands. Now, you would think this is, it's a simple, straightforward states' rights issue, right? But we had, it was a 5-4 decision, and you had a lot of liberal judges ignoring the climate impact of this pipeline. And you had a lot of conservative judges like Roberts ignoring the states' rights issues. And that's how the system works. Like they give you just enough to placate you on cultural issues. But at the end of the day, the corporations, the moneyed interests always win. They always win. And they win by the slimmest of margins to make you think that the system is fair, to make you think that there are a diversity of thoughts and opinions. But the reality is, at the end of the day, every decision made on a federal, state, and local level, every decision made by all of our institutions, whether it's regulatory agencies or the courts or our politicians, the Congress, they all end up serving the moneyed class, the moneyed interest, which includes fossil fuels, at the expense of the public interest.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, you've got the politicians that are servants to these corporate big moneyed interests because they want to win office at all cost. It's this duopoly. It's this pro wrestling thing. They want to keep the other party from getting into power at any and all costs, including apparently destruction of the climate. And then serving them, of course, are the attendant media outlets that I started talking about on the podcast. And I want to point out a couple of things here. This leaked UN report, which is really good to get it out there. The sooner the better. I don't care if it's a draft or whatever. This comes from the agency France Press. I mean, it doesn't come from U.S. media. And it reminds me that, folks, Julian Assange, exposing those war crimes, is still sitting out there in Belmarsh prison after all of this time. And he also is a publisher that's revealing news that we need to get that we're not getting from our media. And I'll give you another story here, Pram, right out of the heartland. You may not be aware of this yet even, but just this past Wednesday, a federal judge sentenced Jessicareznick to 8 years in prison, followed by 3 years unsupervised probation and a restitution, get this, of $3,198,512.70 paid to Energy Transfer LLC for the actions she took in 2016 to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline, a pipeline shut down because it is unnecessary and lethal to everything that it touches. And by the way, it just was stopped. The permits were withdrawn. It's been proven that this thing should not go forward, and this woman is looking at this kind of penalty for some vandalism to some property. They damaged some valves or something. I don't know what they did exactly. But my God, and that's not even hardly getting reported.
And do you know how much property damage pipeline companies do?
Oh,
They build a pipeline.
yes.
They rip homes apart. There's huge cracks in foundations of homes as a result of pipelines. Wetlands get dried up. Farmland. We have a farmer in our community who has had millions of dollars. He's a simple middle-class onion farmer. He's had millions of dollars of damage to his farm as a result of the Millennium Pipeline. It's documented by state agencies, yet nobody is willing to help him at all. He's been deemed expendable. Our community has been deemed expendable. Everyone along a pipeline path near a power plant, we're all deemed expendable. I mean, that's like, it's more than the 99% versus the 1%. It's the 99.9%, versus the 0.1%. And, there's, and again, with issues like climate change and healthcare, I would argue is another issue.
Yes.
You can't, you can't, these are life and death issues. You don't compromise on them. And so our left, where's our left in this country? Where's our establishment left? I'll give you an example. The Sunrise Movement got very involved in the 2020 election, and they promised, if you look at their emails, they promised that we would elect a climate champion with their help. They withheld their endorsement of Bernie until very late in the process, equivocated between Bernie and Warren, and made everyone think that it's just the same, divided the progressive vote, assured that then neither would actually get the nomination. And then, after, it was a fait accompli, told everyone to go out and vote for Biden, and said he was going to be a climate champion. And look at them now. Now they're protesting. I mean, it's political theater. It's political theater in the face of this imminent crisis. And you have these progressive organizations like Working Families Party and, even DSA to some extent. And you have progressive environmental groups, the Big Greens, Sierra Club, and when they get exposed, then they recreate little, like mini greens, like Sunrise Movement, and it's all deception and theater. And in the meantime, we are just emitting more carbon dioxide, more methane. We're at 415 parts per million of CO2, and we're at, I think, 1,892 parts per billion of methane. The last couple of years have seen the largest increase in those emissions ever.
Well, I hear you, and I'm just looking at my clock here. But Pram's so good. We're running out of time here. I want to close up shop here for this edition of the PBG, but I do want to say that, a lot of people will look at this and say, okay, well, what's your solution? I mean, those are the complaints, but here's the solution that I have, and I don't know how realistic it is, but we're never going to solve this from within these political parties. I keep telling everybody that. What we need, as Pramilla mentions, is this stronger left. We need a separate party out here that can just get 10 to 15% of the Democratic voters to support them, and then the Democratic mainstream, which is killing us almost literally on this climate issue, will have to move left with its policies to get these people to come into the fold of the Democratic Party so that it can defeat consistently and easily the maddening horde, as they view it, in the Republican Party. Pram, like I said, I just wish we weren't out of time, but we are. I want to thank you again for coming on the PBG. Anything in closing here real quickly that you want to say as we wrap up?
Just that the most important thing is to be laser focused on policy, because the establishment is very, very clever. They're very clever. They tell you what you want to hear. Yeah. They give you people who look the way you want them to look. We have to be really vigilant about policy. And with climate change, there's no negotiating what we have to do. There's a study out that as we electrify transportation, we are going to double our need for power from where it is today by 2050. So the big question is, everyone wants to drive a Tesla. Everyone says, yeah, I'm just going to, get geothermal. The point is, what is the source of that electric power? Is it fossil fuel based?
Yes.
And we have to understand that there are only two sources of carbon-free base load power that can provide power of that magnitude and scale. One is nuclear, one is hydro. We need to develop both. But as we, have more droughts, hydro might be an issue. So that kind of just leaves nuclear. We have to get over our irrational fear of nuclear power. And embrace it as a climate solution. I authored an article with James Hansen recently. The IPCC, the UN report reaffirms our need for nuclear power. It is a carbon-free baseload source of power. And as we electrify heating and transportation, we are going to need a considerable more amount of power. So stay focused on the policy. Don't let people manipulate you with, with clever terms like environmental justice and, blue-green alliance and all those. Those are all important things. But the central issue is our power must be carbon-free. We have to shut down all fossil fuel generating plants and infrastructure. It's that simple. We can do it tomorrow if we really wanted to.
That's great. And that's a great stopping point. That's a way to wrap it up. Folks, that's Pramilla Malick. And follow her. Read what she said. Turn off the talking heads and read this Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, this UN report draft that's out there. That'll scare the bejabbers out of you. And then start reading Jim Henson and Pramilla Malick and people like that. And maybe we can get ahead of this, start to turn the curve back in our favor. Pramilla Malick, thanks again for coming on a podcast by George.
Thank you for having me.
We'll have her on again, folks, but that's all for now. I hope that you like the PVG podcast by George. Is available on Facebook. Like us there. Subscribe on YouTube. Ring the notification bell. Leave us a comment on iTunes. All of those things help us spread the word of Pramilla Malick and people like her. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.